Sir, you are not permitted to enter here. Step aside. The man froze at the entrance to the Navy SEAL graduation ceremony. A torn jacket clung to him, soaked with the smell of the streets. His calloused hands trembled as they gripped a crumpled invitation bearing his son's name. "Where's your identification? If you don't have it, you need to leave." The security guard's eyes swept over him, as if he were a problem to be managed, not a human being, not a father. He did not resist. He did not explain. He said only one sentence, his voice rough, but his posture unbroken. "I just want to stand in the back and watch my son graduate." A father stripped of his worth, standing at the very gate where honor and sacrifice are meant to be celebrated. If you believe that true courage is not found in gunfire, but in the silence of those who have lived through war, subscribe to service honor stories. So together we can preserve the memories, dignity, and reverence owed to our silent heroes. 6 years. Not 6 lost months. Not a short phase that would simply pass. 6 years lived outside every map of society, where no one calls your name and no one waits for you. The man slept beneath a bridge where cold concrete seeped into his back each night, where the ocean wind cut through his torn jacket, as if to remind him that he still existed. Above him, traffic never stopped, hurried, indifferent, unaware that just below a man who once carried the lives of his brothers on his shoulders was now struggling simply to stay warm. By day, he sat close to the bridge pillar, his back curved by the habit of someone who does not want to be seen. He never raised his hand to beg. He never met the eyes of passers-by. He learned how to shrink his presence to the smallest possible size, as if being quiet enough, invisible enough, might keep the world from pushing him away. Everything he owned fit inside an old military backpack. The straps were frayed. The zipper caught every time it was opened. And still, he opened it slowly, carefully. Because inside were not just belongings. Inside was the part of his life he had never dared to leave behind. A small framed photograph lay in the top pocket. A boy about 8 years old, messy hair grinning wide with a chipped front tooth. Each time he looked at that picture, his throat tightened, not from pain, but from longing. Longing for the time when a small voice called him Dad without needing any explanation. Beside it was a Purple Heart medal wrapped in a piece of black cloth. He never wore it, never showed it to anyone. To him, it was not a symbol of glory, but proof of loss. Every scratch on the medal was tied to a name no one called anymore. At the bottom of the backpack was an old radio, its antenna snapped, its batteries long dead. He kept it anyway. It had belonged to Marcus, the teammate who died in his arms amid gunfire and medevac calls that never came in time. That radio had carried the last voice Marcus ever heard. And as long as he kept it, he believed he had not betrayed that memory. He spoke little. When he did, his words were short and final. "I'm fine, thank you. I'm okay." Not because he had nothing to say, but because he no longer believed anyone wanted to listen. There were nights when the city fell asleep and he leaned back against his backpack, pulling his collar tight, closing his eyes. The old images returned without permission. Explosions echoed in his head. The smell of smoke, of hot metal, of places no one ever wants to remember. He didn't scream. He didn't lash out. He simply opened his eyes, breathed slowly, stared into the darkness ahead, and repeated the same worn whisper, like a mantra polished down by time. "He's better without me." He believed it. Believed that disappearing was a form of protection. Believed that silence was a kind of sacrifice. He never went back to look for his son, not because he didn't love him, but because he was afraid. Afraid of his son's eyes when he saw what his father had become. Afraid of questions that didn't need answers. Afraid that he wouldn't be strong enough to stand there and say, "I failed." So he chose to live outside every frame, outside every ceremony, outside every tribute. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't need to be called a hero. He asked for only one small thing, the right to exist quietly, without disturbing anyone else's life. But that afternoon, standing at the base gate with a crumpled invitation clenched in his hand, 6 years of silence began to tremble. And for the first time in a very long while, he no longer had full control over whether he would remain invisible. He stood at the gate without saying a word, while the 2 security guards looked at each other, then back at him. Their eyes lingered on his worn jacket, on shoes that had lost their shape, on the smell of the street clinging to his clothes. No one was in a hurry yet. No one considered him part of this place. One of them picked up the invitation, turning it over again and again, as if searching for a flaw big enough to end the conversation right there. The other glanced toward the line behind him, where neatly dressed families waited to enter the graduation ceremony. "You're saying you're the father of this recruit?" The question came evenly, neither insulting nor respectful. He nodded. Just one nod. No explanation. Where's your identification? He paused for a beat, then shook his head. Anything to prove who you are? He shook his head again. The air grew heavy. He felt the eyes behind him settle onto his back. Someone shifted aside. Someone pulled a child closer. Someone let out a faint sigh of irritation, quiet but loud enough for him to hear. Then the question was thrown at him, blunt and inescapable, leaving no room to turn away. What proof do you have that you're his father? He stood still, not because he was surprised, but because he knew he didn't have what they were asking for. He didn't have a birth certificate in his pocket. No recent photographs, no records. Nothing this system would recognize as valid. All he had were memories. Evenings spent teaching his son to read. Moments carrying him on his shoulders, laughter ringing close to his ear. Mornings walking him to school, turning back to watch until the gate finally closed. But memories are not proof, and fatherhood does not live inside an official stamp. I don't have any, he said, his voice low and slow without pleading. I just want to sit in the back. I won't cause any trouble. The two guards looked at each other again. A brief exchange of glances. A decision weighed not by who he was, but by whether he might become a problem. Behind him, a man in a tailored suit shook his head. A woman whispered something to her husband and turned away. He heard it, but didn't look back. He stood there, spine straight, arms at his sides. No begging, no arguing. He was used to being doubted, used to being treated as someone who didn't belong. But today, that doubt reached deeper, touching the fragile piece of dignity he had managed to hold on to. Rules are rules, a voice said. Then after a brief silence, we can let you in, but you have to sit in the last row, and you'll need to hand over your backpack. He lowered his eyes to the backpack on his shoulder. His hand tightened around the strap just for a moment. Inside was everything he had left. Still, he didn't object. He took the backpack off, set it down, pushed it toward them. The movement was slow, careful, as if he were surrendering a piece of his life. The zipper was opened. Eyes passed over the old photograph, paused on a piece of metal wrapped in black cloth, brushed against a radio with a broken antenna. Then the zipper was closed. No one said anything. No questions, no apologies. A small claim tag was handed to him. Follow this way. He took it, nodded. Thank you. Just 2 words. Nothing more, nothing less. He passed through the gate. Inside, a low murmur of voices filled the air. Laughter. The scrape of chairs. He walked slowly, not searching for anyone, not looking around. He found the last row, near the exit, where there were the fewest eyes. He sat down, back straight, hands resting on his thighs. Around him, a few people glanced over, then looked away. A chair was pulled slightly farther back. A small space opened up just enough to keep distance. He didn't react. Not because he felt nothing, but because he had learned how to endure in silence. He had been permitted to exist here, but only on the lowest terms. Just enough not to disrupt the perfect image of this ceremony of honor. And as he sat quietly in that last row, the memories he had buried for so many years began to rise, opening a door straight back into a past he had never truly escaped. As he sat still in the last row, memory returned without asking. Not loudly, not with warning. Just a familiar sensation running down his spine, as if someone had spoken the very name he had buried deep inside himself for years. He had not always been the man who bowed his head at a gate. He had once been a master chief in a SEAL team, the one in front on missions whose names were never meant to be spoken aloud. On the battlefield, he carried a call sign, a name that made others fall silent when it was mentioned. Not out of fear, but out of respect. He was the one who went in first, the one who came back out, the one who dragged the wounded from places no one else dared to enter. There were nights he did not sleep, not from cold, but from memory. He remembered the faces that never returned. He remembered the broken breathing of a young soldier slung over his shoulder. He remembered eyes wide open looking at him one last time, waiting for something he could not deliver in time. Every name was a scar. Every scar was a question without an answer. He was used to pressure, used to orders, used to deciding in seconds who lived and who did not. But no training prepared him for the moment when the war ended and the sounds did not. Explosions echoed in his head in the middle of a quiet parking lot. Fireworks became gunfire. A sudden touch sent his body reacting before his mind could catch up. He went to the VA. Once. Then again. The files grew thicker. The appointments stretched farther apart. Waiting rooms filled with the same exhausted eyes. We'll call you back. You need to be patient. Your case is being processed. He learned how to wait. But waiting did not heal. It only widened the distance between a man and himself. There were days he tried to work, tried to stand steady, tried to look normal, but the anger came without warning, like an undercurrent. And right behind it came guilt heavier than any pack he had ever carried. He saw it in his son's eyes whenever he lost control. No accusation, just fear. "I'm okay," he used to say. But his voice never convinced even himself. He began to believe that his presence was no longer a shelter, but a threat. That every startled night, every sudden outburst, every long, unnatural silence left a mark on the child he loved more than his own life. And so he made a decision he still could not bring himself to name. He left, not in an argument, not with a door slammed shut. He left quietly, carrying the false belief that disappearing was a form of sacrifice. That if he were no longer there, his son would live a lighter life. "He'll be better without me," he told himself over and over, until it became the only truth he allowed himself to believe. On the battlefield, he had been the man others leaned on. In ordinary life, he became a man with no one to lean on. A hero in stories never told. A failed father in a small kitchen where he could not protect his son from the invisible wounds he carried inside. Now sitting in the last row, he understood that the most painful loss was not the loss of rank, but the loss of the right to stay. He had fought so no one would be left behind. But when he came home, he was the one who stepped out the door believing it was the best choice for the person he loved most. And just as memory brushed against the name he had avoided for 6 long years, the present began to shift, preparing for the moment when the past and the truth could no longer remain hidden. His son's name rang out in the middle of the ceremony. Clear, decisive, unmistakable among all the others. He lifted his head by instinct as if hearing those exact syllables was enough for his body to remember the way. The young man stepped forward, back-straight eyes fixed ahead, his shoulders carrying a calm the father recognized instantly, the kind of calm forged through sleepless nights, through falling down and standing back up, through trials that never need to be spoken aloud. The Admiral delivered the final rites in a voice both familiar and solemn, steady yet warm. Then came the traditional question, the one he had heard countless times in his life, the question that opens a moment of passing the torch etched into every SEAL's memory. Is there a SEAL present who would like to pin the trident? No one stood. A stretch of silence followed, then another. He looked around slowly. No one stepped forward. No hand was raised. He realized it before his son did. Family was absent. Loved ones were gone. The rows in front remained still. This silence was no longer ceremonial. It was a void. His son stood there waiting. His gaze stayed forward, but for the briefest moment, something flickered across his face, a disappointment tightly held back. The father saw it clearly, because he had seen that same look in the mirror. His hand stirred. There was no decision, no long thought. Just the instinct of a father stronger than fear, stronger even than his original resolve to remain unseen. The hand rose slowly, uncertainly, as if testing whether he still had the right to do so. As his sleeve slid back, the tattoo was revealed. The coordinates, the faded trident, a mark that could not be mistaken. In that instant, the air changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was a collective pause, as if all unseen sounds had been stretched tight and held in place. His son turned. Their eyes met. The young man recognized him before he understood what was happening, not through reason, but through feeling, through memory that had never disappeared. His lips parted, and the words came out not loud, but clear enough for the nearest rows to hear Admiral, "My father is here." A few murmurs rose, then fell away. The Admiral stopped. Her gaze followed the raised hand moving through the rows until it reached the man standing in the last row. She saw the worn clothes, the posture too straight for such an appearance. Then she looked down at his arm, and she froze. Everything happened quickly, but to him it stretched like a lifetime. Her eyes rested on the tattoo. No scrutiny, no doubt. Just instant recognition, like speaking the name of someone long thought lost. A name escaped softly, almost a breath reaper. He heard it. and he knew that moment could never be undone. No paperwork was needed, no explanations, no further proof. That single name was enough to shatter every definition that had been placed upon him. Homeless man, unidentified outsider. The figure in the last row. All of it dissolved at once, giving way to a truth no one in that room was prepared to face. He lowered his hand very slowly, not out of shame, but because he understood that from this moment on, he could no longer remain hidden. He looked at his son. The young man stood a little straighter now, as if he had just reclaimed a part of himself he hadn't known was missing. No words were needed, no nods exchanged. Only an invisible bond drawn taut between them, stitching past and present together in a moment no one could have foreseen. And as that name spread through the silence, true authority began to move, stepping out from its familiar place and heading straight toward the man in the last row. The Admiral left her position and walked straight down the center aisle. She did not look around. She did not seek confirmation from anyone else. Her gaze locked onto the man standing in the last row, as if in that crowded room there was only one presence that needed to be called by its rightful name. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the deep lines carved into his face, the calloused hands, the arm marked by years no one had spoken for. There were no questions, no doubt. Only the cold clarity of recognition from someone who knew exactly who stood before her. Then she saluted. A full salute. Precise. Unmistakable. Before hundreds of people. The entire room froze. Every whisper fell silent. Master Chief. She said, her voice not raised, but caring. We didn't know. He stood tall. His shoulders did not shake. His hands did not tremble. He returned the salute, slow, steady, a reflex that had never left him. No display. No need to prove anything. Just two people who had once stood in the same world, meeting again in a place no one had expected. Admiral, he replied. 2 words. Enough. His name was spoken correctly. His rank was restored. Not through a speech, but through an action that could not be denied. From the front, his son could no longer remain still. He stepped away, and then he ran. No hesitation, no concern for protocol, no thought for rows of seat ceremony or watching eyes. He ran straight to him like a child running toward the one place he believes is safe. He wrapped his arms tightly around him, both arms locked in. No distance held. I thought you were dead, his son said, his voice breaking between sharp breaths. I thought I'd lost you. He held him tighter. One hand came up behind his son's head, a motion so familiar it felt untouched by 6 years of absence. His voice was low, rough, and unguarded, I thought. You'd be better without me. The words fell between them, heavy and honest. No excuses, no softening. Just the late confession of a man who had believed the wrong thing for too long. His son shook his head, his face pressed into his father's shoulder. I just need you here. No one in the room spoke. No one needed to. A man's worth was returned in that moment, not through a collective apology, but through the way every eye that once looked away now held still. Not through applause, but through a silence deep enough that no one dared break it. The Admiral stood there watching. She did not intervene. She did not hurry them. She did not ask them to return to their places, because she understood some rituals matter more than any written rule. He released his son slowly, looked straight into his eyes. A small nod. No promises. No speeches. Just presence, the very thing he once believed he no longer had the right to give. Permission, he said, turning back to the Admiral. Granted, she replied. He stepped forward beside his son. Not fast. Not slow. Each step was a statement that needed no words. The rows around them rose together. No signal. No instruction. They stood because they understood what they were witnessing. His son stood a little straighter, walking beside him. Not out of pride, but because he was seen. Not because of a title, but because he was recognized as this man's son. There, in a ceremony designed to honor achievement, the greatest honor was given to something far simpler, a human being called by his rightful name, and a father allowed to stand beside his son. And as the emotions settled, the question that followed was no longer who this man had once been, but from this moment forward, what the system would do to repair what had been forgotten for far too long. After the ceremony, nothing could return to the way it had been before. Not because emotions had run high, but because a truth had been called by its rightful name in front of too many people. A system that had once turned away was now forced to face itself. We let you fall for far too long, the Admiral said, her voice low and direct. That is unacceptable. No excuses, no justifications, just a belated admission. What followed was laid out plainly and clearly. Full medical support, long-term psychological care, stable housing, no more endless waiting lists, no more paperwork passed from one desk to another. This time there would be accountability. He listened. He didn't nod right away. He didn't show relief. 6 years of being forgotten had taught him not to trust promises that sounded too polished. But this time he looked into the eyes of the person speaking. Those eyes did not look away. This is not charity, the Admiral continued. This is a debt. He was silent for a moment, then replied in a low voice, I don't need pity. We're not offering pity, she answered. We're offering responsibility. Another offer was placed before him not as a favor, but as a choice. To serve as a mentor. To speak with those about to walk the path he had already walked. Not to recount victories, not to build monuments, but to talk about the cost. About sleepless nights. About coming home while the war never truly left the mind. If you accept, she said, tell the truth. Don't make it prettier than it really is. He gave a small nod. I only know how to tell the truth. Later, he and his son sat beside each other. No ceremony, no distance. Just two people who had avoided one another for far too long. The conversation did not begin gently. Why did you leave? The question was asked directly. No accusation, no avoidance. He took a slow breath. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of hurting you even more. His son looked at him for a long time. You hurt me more when you disappeared. He nodded. No argument. No defense. I know, I only understand that now. You thought leaving was a sacrifice, his son went on. But to me it was a loss. He lowered his head. Not in shame this time, but in understanding. No training had ever taught him how to be a father in ordinary life. On the battlefield, he knew how to protect his team, but in a small kitchen facing a child who needed his presence, he had chosen to retreat. I was wrong, he said. 3 words. No more. No less. His son let out a breath. I don't need you to be strong like before. I just need you to stay. That sentence was not immediate forgiveness, but it was an open door. No glossing over the pain. No promise that everything would be fine. Just a chance to stop running. In the days that followed, he began therapy. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't quick. Each session peeled back layers of memory that had hardened over time. He learned to name his anger before it exploded. Learned to ask for help before he was depleted. Learned to stay in moments of discomfort instead of disappearing. When he spoke to younger men, he didn't mention medals. He talked about things no one wants to hear, but everyone needs to know that coming home is not the end, that silence does not heal, that leaving is not sacrifice. Courage, he told them, is not enduring everything alone. Courage is staying and saying that you need help. No one applauded, but many nodded, and for him that was enough. He did not become a symbol. He became a man learning how to live again. And this time he did not do it alone. And as those lessons slowly settled, what remained was no longer about correcting the past, but about how he chose to leave behind a different legacy for the future. He stood before a class of young trainees with a simple presence, no rank, no insignia, no symbols needed to prove who he was. The faces in front of him were still young. Bright eyes, straight shoulders. They carried the future, on them hope, ambition, stories not yet begun. He looked at them not as people about to step into glory, but as human beings about to carry a cost no one else could bear for them. He did not speak of victories. He did not mention missions whose names were never meant to be spoken. He spoke only of mornings when he woke up with his heart still pounding, as if he were on the battlefield. Of nights startled awake by the smallest sound. Of coming home and not knowing where he fit within his own life. He paused for a moment, then spoke slowly and clearly, as if placing each word directly into their hands. You don't survive this alone. No one laughed. No one took notes. But many eyes changed. He did not ask them to remember him. He wanted them to remember that sentence when everything became too heavy, when silence began to feel like a wall, when leaving seemed easier than staying. He wanted them to understand that courage is not only moving forward, but also turning back to find someone else when you are exhausted. After the talks, he left quietly. No one asked for an autograph. No one took photos. He was not searching for recognition. He did not need to be remembered. What he wanted to leave behind was not written on paper, but lived inside a choice, a young person one day deciding to make a phone call instead of disappearing. On some afternoons, he sat beside his son by the shore. The waves came and went steady and unbroken. The wind carried salt and memory. They did not talk much. There was no need to recount the lost years. No need to fill the space with explanations. Presence was enough to replace every apology that came too late. His son threw a stone into the water. He watched the circles spread outward. Then he nodded quietly. He no longer lived to prove anything. He lived to keep the simplest promise he had once broken to stay. To stay through hard days. To stay when the people he loved needed somewhere to lean. To stay even when he himself was not fully healed. He still carried the memory of those who never returned. Their names did not grow lighter with time, but now they no longer pulled him down. They became part of the reason he kept moving forward slowly, deliberately, without running away. He understood that honor is not something displayed and stored away. Honor lives in how a person is treated when they are at their weakest, in whether they are forgotten or called by their rightful name, in whether society turns away or bends down to meet their eyes. And he understood this as well. Legacy is not what people say about you when you stand at the highest point. Legacy is what remains after all the glory is gone. It is a young person brave enough to ask for help, a father brave enough to stay, a human being who no longer has to live invisible. Honor does not disappear when a person falls. It disappears only when no one remembers or calls them by their true name. If this story makes you believe that honor and kindness never retire, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Service Honor Stories so that no memory of them is ever forgotten.